Hey guys, welcome back. So for this one, we're going to talk a bit more about the Hunt for Wolverine and the death of Daken as this event draws to a conclusion. And as of right now, the Hunt for Wolverine is over. And this series, which is comprised of different interwoven miniseries to make this entire series, it has already come to its conclusion, starting with the Hunt for Wolverine one-shot and concluding with the Hunt for Wolverine Dead Ends. And in the next video for this playlist, I'm going to go through all the key points and connections that really lead to that conclusion. Because when I read the issue, I just felt like if you did not read through this series, it's going to be a huge disappointment because you're not going to understand what's going on. And so before we get started, much earlier on in this playlist, I had mentioned a conversation that had taken place between Daredevil and Detective Frank McGee. And this was a conversation in which Detective Frank McGee had mentioned, okay, you're looking for Wolverine, well, there's a number of them out there. And for whatever reason, out of the ones that were mentioned, Android Wolverine stood out to me. And for that reason, I went back and we did like an old classic Wolverine talk on his origin, his connection to Wolverine, and his connection to the Reavers. And as it turned out, he actually showed up in this series. Go figure. But the reason why I'm glad that we went back and covered that is because much of that history between Lady Deathstrike and Wolverine, it shows back up in Claws of a Killer, and even some for Sabretooth as well. But in the Android Wolverine origin video, I went more in depth about Lady Deathstrike and her vendetta for Wolverine, because when she discovered him with adamantium already bonded to his skeleton, she knew without a doubt that this was a product of stolen research from her father. And even though at the time she was hunting for Bullseye, who had adamantium enhancements, when her and Wolverine crossed paths, she didn't feel any different. She just wanted to rip the adamantium from his bones. And I like that this series pulls back to your older original Wolverine comics and also some Daredevil as well, because I believe that Daredevil issues is where more of the history with Lady Deathstrike took place. And come to think of it, I think we talked about Lady Deathstrike's history more in the first video, where I went back and talked about Mr. Sinister stealing Wolverine's body for the first time. But either way, it's on the playlist. It's one of those first two videos. But another reason that I'm glad that we went back and covered these things is because the technology that she had used to track down Bullseye with his adamantium enhancements is the same technology that she plans to use to find Wolverine. And with her finding this out by way of her former associates, the Reavers, she calls in Sabretooth and Daken to fill them in on what she knows so far. And so now, first of all, this trio is much different from any of the other teams. Like with Kitty Pryde, who had initially reached out to Tony Stark and Daredevil and they formed their teams, which had their own similar motivations, whether it was they felt like they just needed to solve the case and put together a team of detectives to find a missing person because that's what they do. And in that case, you really only have Daredevil, who has a personal history with Wolverine. But it works because Frank McGee and Misty Knight, who don't necessarily need to know more about him, it works because they know he's dangerous and he needs to be found. And in the case of Tony Stark, there's a number of reasons, because you have that personal promise that he made to Logan that at the time of his death that he makes sure that his body doesn't fall into the wrong hands. And I like the way that that also reached back, established that promise, and built it on the cornerstone of Tony Stark just doing better as a person. But that ties in well with Tony Stark, Jessica Jones, and Luke Cage, because with the addition of Wolverine on their team, they make up the new Avengers. And with Lord Kinney joining them, the argument can be made that they're the new Avengers. And I doubt that's going to be a thing that sticks, but I would very much like to see that team with the suits come back. And last but not least, you also had Kitty Pryde putting wheels on the ground and looking for Wolverine herself. In doing so, teaming up with Storm, Jubilee, Domino, Psylocke, and Rogue, which was further explored within Mystery and Madripoor, which once again is comprised of your group of people with history with Wolverine. And once again, this is one of those things we'll dive deeper into when we get to the conclusion for the final video of this playlist as we get into the Hunt for Wolverine Dead Ends. But as I was saying, with Lady Deathstrike, Daken, and Sabretooth, the thing that makes them different from any of these other teams, well, first, they do want to find Wolverine, but unlike the other teams, they actually want him to stay dead. And their specific reasons and motivations why are different. Like with Lady Deathstrike, her reasons and motivations very much tie to her father, and for Daken, it's very deep on an emotional level. And for the longest time, like as a reader, this is one of the things that I've always wanted to turn around, because at some point I would have liked to have gotten the delivery of a better relationship between Logan and Daken. Especially with Daken's primary reason for wanting Logan dead being rooted in his blame for Logan in the death of his own mother. And as a result, over the years, it's led to his hatred for Wolverine increasing in a number of failed attempts to try to kill Wolverine, which also led to him getting the blade of Muramasa infused to a couple of his claws, which as a result, Wolverine ended up breaking off those claws and that doesn't necessarily build the father-son relationship that well. But I'll definitely say another reason why I've always wanted to see this relationship turn around between Logan and Daken is because when Frank Castle came back for round 2 with Daken and may have nearly killed him, Wolverine stepped in to save Daken, the son who wanted him dead, and he went to town on the Punisher, who is his friend. But if your friend wants to kill your son, then you just gotta disassemble him. That's just the way it goes. And that's regardless of however your father and son relationship is, as bad as it may be. Because if you guys remember when we talked about this, when Wolverine first stepped in, he told the Punisher, like, look, Frank, I know this kid's a screw up, but Daken's my son, Frank. He ain't perfect, but he's all I got. And that was just one of those moments that showed us, underneath it all, Logan loves his son. But going back to Lady Deathstrike, Sabretooth, and Daken, after meeting up in Manhattan, I believe it was, they used Lady Deathstrike's tracking technology to search for Logan's most recent whereabouts. And this leads them to Maybelle, Arizona, and when they get there, it is a complete ghost town, like nobody is around. And on top of that, Lady Deathstrike, her signal to track Wolverine, it goes on the fritz. And of course they split up to kind of sniff it out and do the rest of the tracking on foot, because even though they couldn't find any civilians like just walking around outside going on about life, they did pick up the scent of something strange going on. So when Daken walks into this bar alone, which is actually a bar that Wolverine had been in not long ago, he runs into a Soteria kill team. But these guys are the least of his troubles, because as soon as he sees them, the bodies that had been laying on the floor, they actually had been triggered to become zombies. And when Daken walks in, they immediately go for him. But even crazier than that, when one of them bites him, he realizes that his healing factor no longer works. And from here, it just turns into The Walking Dead. And I don't really watch The Walking Dead. I've only seen like a few episodes of it, and all of which have been very scattered apart. But from what I have seen, I could just imagine like with this happening, like Negan just walking in with a smirk on his face and that bat over his shoulder, just kind of like, ha, rookie. But the thing is, not too long ago, like I mentioned, Wolverine, he was actually here. And as it turned out, this location Soteria had been using as a place for isolation to conduct different experiments, one of which is creating zombies and the other is disabling healing factors and possibly mutant powers altogether. And it's here where we really put together that this team working for Soteria that sacrificed the lives of all the people who stayed in this small portion of Arizona, that collectively they are involved with whatever it is that Wolverine is doing. And not the people who live there, but Soteria, whose ultimate goal still has me scratching my head. And whatever that ultimate goal may be, you can tell that they care very little for the casualties that come along the way. And we know this as well because when Wolverine was here, we saw him activate a device, which is what turned these people into zombies. And it was set up like this green bomb to where it went off and everything within that radius, at least that was human, would be killed and then later on turned into a zombie. But as far as anyone with a healing factor, their healing factor will be temporarily inactive. And that's what we're seeing with Daken, Sabretooth, and Lady Deathstrike. And some of which was caught on camera by like cell phones moments before, which we'll revisit when we talk about the conclusion. But the way that the person who orchestrated this just didn't care, it's ridiculous. But as far as for Daken, before he's literally eaten alive, because keep in mind their healing factor is out of the picture right now. But before he's eaten alive, the kill team shot all the zombies off of him and they took him in. But as for Sabretooth and Lady Deathstrike, who went off in their own direction and initially leaving Daken in the car, when they get back to the car to regroup and get out of there, it's blown up, sending a pretty clear signal of whoever is doing this, they kind of want him dead. And when we find out the people that are involved, I feel like that's one of the main kickers, or actually two in this case. But as far as Daken, when he's taken by this kill team, unfortunately for them, they didn't know that he was the son of Wolverine. And they figured that out kind of violently when he cuts himself out of his restraints. And I gotta say, for Daken, who as a fighter is already capable to take down two guys with guns, but for him to pull this whole thing off, then jump out the window with no healing factor, I gotta say, he deserves some extra points for that. Because in most cases, you'd be like, well, you got a healing factor, that's why you can do this, that, and the third. And it's almost like he was like, oh yeah? Well, watch this. But not really. That was his only way out of that situation. But skipping forward to Lady Deathstrike and Sabretooth, they find cover nearby after fleeing another zombie attack that happened right after the car explosion. And for Daken, after jumping through that window and fighting through some more zombies, he ends up stumbling into their hideout, which he came across across where he saw a parked car next to like this gas station, and at that point he knew somebody else was inside. And when he climbed to the roof just to get away from the zombies, the roof kind of collapsed on him and he just kind of fell in their lap. But now that they're all together, Daken's able to share with them the information that he had got from the kill team, and most of it was from eavesdropping their radios, hearing them talk on the radio, plus the green device that he had seen back at that bar. So from that and hearing the kill team call the zombies test subjects, they pretty much put together for the most part what was going on there, and just made the assumption that the device that created the zombies had also interfered with their healing factor. But after putting this together, they go back and forth a little bit over the idea of whether just to leave or to actually destroy this device. And even though they were kind of split on the decision, ultimately they decided to destroy it before they left. But when the soldiers find them, before they can really get out, this forces them to take the fight to the streets, and this is where the story gets even crazier, because within that fight, Lady Deathstrike cuts the mask off of one of the soldiers' face, only to discover that it was her father. Her deceased father, that she killed way back in the older Daredevil series. And even though he was a jerk and very abusive and like would brand his children on the face, when she killed him, she only did it because he was seconds away from throwing the final blow and killing Daredevil. And at the time he was under the alias Lord Darkwind. Not really sure if he's reprising that name, but I think it's pretty safe to say that he remembers quite a bit of that. But we really don't know because we don't get a lot of dialogue out of him. But the thing that is clear is that one, he's back from the dead, and here he's trying to kill Lady Deathstrike. But if I were to guess which it were, whether he's being mind controlled or not, I would have to say yes, because the only thing we really get out of him as far as dialogue is "you will be useful." And just before he strikes her again, Daken comes in to save her, and her father stabs him in the heart. And Sabretooth comes to help, but it's a little too late. But with Daken being stabbed in the heart, aside from his healing factor being gone, like even with his healing factor, this would still be pretty serious. And the reason why I say this is because if we go back to a conversation that Daken had with Honey Badger back in Orphans of X, which we also talked about in a previous video, but I'm not sure if we talked about this conversation specifically, because back then at the time when they were on the run from the Orphans of X and waiting to be picked up by the Blackbird, Honey Badger asked the question, so like if one of us are cut in half, will two of us grow back? Like one from the bottom half and the other from the top half? And Laura Kinney, she just responded saying, I don't know. But Daken had went on to mention that being pierced through the heart or through the head in some circumstances can prove to be fatal. And the way that he explained it at the time sounded more like if the obstructions are not removed, then that could be their cause of death. But here in Arizona, he just bleeds out because he does not have a healing factor, and he pretty much just dies here in the arms of Sabretooth, which is pretty crazy because they've had their differences as well too. But they kind of find a common ground by wanting to both kill Wolverine, so it's weird. But continuing with more weird discoveries, we also find that Sabretooth's son, Graydon Creed, is also alive. And because he has a history of hating mutants and wanting the world to be rid of them, this makes him an interesting pick to see here with these guys. And it really makes you wonder, what is their connection? Both Graydon and Kenji Oyama, with them both being brought back from the dead and seemingly working together on this experiment. And as for Graydon, for those of you that are curious, he's died a couple times. At one point he was assassinated by Mystique, who had traveled back in time to kill him for killing her lover's grandson, but then later the Purifiers brought him back, and Bastion was able to revive him by using the techno-organic virus. But that run was shortly lived, pun intended, because he ended up dying a few issues later. But back in Arizona with Lady Deathstrike and Sabretooth being the last two standing, time is not on their side, because on the different soldiers' radios, they're continually hearing confirmation for an airstrike coming within a matter of minutes. And I'm talking about level everything and clear the area, like possibly hundreds of soldiers coming in for backup. And for Lady Deathstrike, for a while she tried to talk to her father and get sense out of him and get him to respond, but the only response he gives is "you will be useful." And he cuts off her left hand, which I'm not sure counts as a response, but actions do speak louder than words, so I guess that was his form of communication. But she communicates right back in a similar dialect by just tearing out his throat, so you know, they kind of got their point across to each other. But the crazy thing is, with this clean sweep coming through, being inbound within a matter of minutes, I think at this point it was close to 6 minutes left, they really didn't have the time to get the answers or press as hard as they would like to get the answers to these last minute newfound discoveries. And as a result, Lady Deathstrike goes to help out Sabretooth by way of killing Graydon Creed in the middle of their fight, and not really knowing till after the fact that that was his son. But when they get to the device that is the cause of the zombies and also the cause of their healing factors being taken away, it really puts them in a similar situation to where we had seen Wolverine not too long ago, because they don't know if they tamper with this thing, if it's rigged to explode, and if so, will they come back? And by the way things have been going with it already taking their healing factor, that is not very likely. But when they decide to destroy it, it really reminds me of Wolverine making that sacrifice. And I feel like it says even more for the character of Sabretooth and Lady Deathstrike, because if you would have asked me before, like, would these two sacrifice their lives to stop this device, I'd have said no. But seemingly there's something about seeing that piece of their past come back, and perhaps even the death of Daken, that caused them to really go through with it. Because not long ago when the three of them were talking about it, it was up for debate. But here in the face of death, when Sabretooth tells her that was his son, she just has this blank dead stare in her eye and she just says, do it. And really this is because when it's said and done, they would rather die than end up become whatever her father and his son had become. And for that reason, they go through with destroying it. And so days later, while the Soteria team are cleaning up the wreckage, they find Daken's body and they take it, reporting that they have acquired a new asset. Because much like Graydon and Kenji kept saying, they would be useful. And as for the bodies of Lady Deathstrike and Sabretooth, they are getting out of there. They're like way down the highway. And it's like they realize, oh, we didn't get blown to pieces, oh, we out of here. And leaving from there, they go to meet up with the Reavers, who are old friends of Lady Deathstrike, so they can give her a new hand. But that'll do it for this one, guys. Hopefully this video cleared up a little bit more about the Hunt for Wolverine, because I really aim to highlight more of the connecting tissue. And I do that mostly because often I notice when you guys are reading through a series, or even after you finish a series like this one, in the comments of other videos, oftentimes people end up with more questions than answers. So hopefully with this playlist of our discussion on the Hunt for Wolverine comes to a close, hopefully that flips around and you guys got more answers and see more of the connections of how all these different narratives tie together. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe so you can catch spills every week, and don't forget to hit that bell up top so we can squad up in the comments for the first hour. Alright, later.